Good morning, everybody. My name's Jason Fox. I'm the Senior Technical Evangelist at the FIWARE Foundation, and the subject of today's webinar is an overview to FIWARE itself. It assumes no prior knowledge of FIWARE and will introduce all the concepts you need to know. So the learning goals for this particular session are as follows. You will try to understand what is context data in the realms of FIWARE, how is context data used within smart applications, and how can FIWARE help? What is NGSI v2? It's a term which is fairly common when you're talking about FIWARE. And then finally, three things about aspects of FIWARE itself: the FIWARE Catalogue, the FIWARE Marketplace, and what is the overall role of the FIWARE Foundation itself. Because sometimes the word FIWARE can be used to mean the technologies, and sometimes it can mean to use the actual FIWARE Foundation. As you well know, the internet has been changing over the years. We've gone from very simple client-server applications through to a much more complex and rich ecosystem. The idea that you can have interactions which are business to business or things like social media would have been completely unknown 5-10 years ago. And you can see that the amount of information we are getting is increasing all the time. We've gone from simple B2B, moving up to actually getting people to talk about, talk to each other over the web, explain what they're doing, what have you. And now it's a situation where machines, devices, robots are able to talk to the internet and explain what is going on. And this is the idea behind Smart Life. The background to all these things is context data. Context data describes what is going on, where, when, and why. Well, the way I prefer to describe it is that there are three vital questions you need to ask any device or any context entity. And these are: who are you? In other words, you must have some sort of unique ID within your system. What are you? In other words, there should be a type of the entity which will describe the data model which holds the data. And finally, you need to ask, how are you feeling today? In other words, what are the attributes which are associated with this entity? Now, there is one obvious attribute, which is location, which is dealt with differently within FIWARE, because that means you can then do things like geofencing and what have you. But for the vast majority of attributes, it will depend entirely on what you actually are. So, for example, a weather forecast would have the idea of temperature or whether it's cloudy or what have you, whereas a coffee shop would have a location, like where it is, but also things like the opening times or even possibly the prices of the coffee or what have you. And with the cars, you could have a car with a GPS in it, would have a location, or obviously have it would have a number plate and so on and so forth. So you can see the actual context data will depend on the element you're talking about rather than being consistent across all devices. What this means is that we have more and more data which is coming from a wide variety of locations, a wide variety of sources, and we want to make sure that such data is accessible outside of the information silo. You don't want to have all of your mobility data completely separate from all of your building data. You want to be able to access elements as necessary. You want to be able to get information from additional web services. You want to be able to get information from social media. You obviously want to get information from IoT as well. It's all sorts of different locations where you can get the information about context. Now, this means that you have a situation where it is possible to retrieve information over a large amount of data, so you can get a better position on what you should be doing within your smart system. The whole point about a smart solution is that you need to gather these sources, analyze these sources, and then change the real world. The whole point about a smart solution is that smart solutions are not isolated into a single place. It's a case of, I have a model of the world. I modify that model of the world by processing my data, saying, what should I do next? And thereafter, this will actuate real devices. It will change the state of the world. The state of the world will then be retrieved from sensors, so that it will go back into the system, and you get this feedback loop across here. So you go process, capture, actuate, capture, process, actuate, capture, process, actuate. So you're constantly changing the state of the smart solution. That is what is meant by a smart solution. As you can see, you can get this information in different domains. Within the domain of smart cities, you would have things like a shop with a location, or a business name, or a bus where it's moving around, and the driver would change, or the number of passengers and how full it is would change. But it's not just about smart cities. It's applicable to multiple verticals. You can have the same situation in agri-food, where you could have tractors, which obviously have a location like a bus would have a location, but you could also have crops, which would have things like the humidity or what have you. You can see that the idea is that you have an entity which is covering something. It is covering something in the real world. Finally, another example, you could just take industry. You could have tankers, you could have the amount of space in a gas tank, and so on and so forth. You can see this can apply to multiple domains. So what's the concept of FIWARE? What if there were a standard API for accessing context information? A standard, universal standard for context information. You will have a situation where, if you are supplying in a neutral standard, you could have two separate cities. Both of these cities happen to have a FIWARE-based solution, who are then offering their data to third parties, which would then be able to know that the data is in a standard format. So if you, in this case, you're trying to solve the final mile problem, where you don't know where to go because you don't know where the parking spaces are. If parking spaces could be defined in a vendor-neutral standard, it doesn't matter what the low-level sensors are, whether they're different in these two cities. It means that you have an overall idea of, this is how things are overall in this system, so that when your mobile phone goes to one of these two cities, you can say, okay, switch it on. Where are the car parking spaces? Tell me what's going on. You can also get a situation where we don't care within FIWARE what the low-level IoT protocol is used. There are different competing IoT platforms which have got perfectly valid reasons to exist, because they might be low energy, they might be specific to domains, they might be solving a specific problem. However, if you can have an overriding context data layer above this, you can get things like this one API call, which we've got down on the top of the screen, saying we can get data by just having stuff on a well-known endpoint, v2 entities, / then the name of the entity itself, that's the ID, followed by the rest of the information. So this is getting the presence sensor value of that lamp 1. This URL is part of the NGSI v2 definition, which is an open API specification for context data. The whole point being that you can use this standard, so you will be able to retrieve values from a sensor by just making a GET request, which is obviously very simple if you're a web developer. Similarly, if you want to actuate devices, it's just simply a put request. It's not difficult to get these sort of things to happen. We can just switch on a water sprinkler by doing, again, an NGSI call using HTTP, just a standard put, HTTP verb put, and it's got a well-known URL saying, for this particular attribute of that particular entity, change that value, the value to on. So actuation becomes a side effect, effectively, of just changing what we're doing with the NGSI interface. It means you have a very, very simple API. If we have this situation where you have common a common context layer, you are able to interchange the information around the system quite easily, and you are reducing the silos within our system. So you have a situation where you can have common authorization policies. You can have possibilities of selling your data if you wish, because you'll be doing it from the NGSI standards to whatever data standard you're using for monetization. Now, the concept here has been picked up by the European Commission as, and we've been given a rubber stamp as one of the building blocks for connecting Europe facility, which means that someone out there thinks that actually this idea is rather good. It's already got a lot of traction in smart cities. We're growing in other verticals as we speak. So it means that you have a system where there are ways of getting the data which are open to other users. Rather than have to do all your development proprietarily in-house, if you are offering your data at this standard or offering this interface in a standard, it means that other SMEs, other companies are able to access this data and do the work for you and do the work once. If you are an SME, if you can make your application FIWARE ready, in other words, it's able to talk this language, it means you can plug into any system. Similarly, if you have a processing layer which is talking NGSI, it can pass information down to devices which are FIWARE ready, any device, regardless of the actual platform. So it means that the whole system avoids vendor lock-in. So, FIWARE, what are we? FIWARE is promoting a public royalty-free standard for context information management. This is a simple REST API. This is this NGSI v2, which I've mentioned already. And obviously with the v2, you can see that there was a v1. It's in the process of adapting as time goes by. The next generation will be called NGSI LD, which adds in linked data concepts such that you can have one entity and then you can get information about another entity from it. So you have an application using this NGSI or FIWARE NGSI system, and you can get the attributes from elsewhere. Once again, you have your entities with your attributes. It's seen as a good idea. This whole NGSI system has been rubber stamped by a series of relevant standards bodies such as GSMA, CEF, which I mentioned earlier, and ETSI. The ETSI standard has been for NGSI has recently been completed, and this is covering things like mobile operators, like context data and information for smart cities. Furthermore, there are other bodies such as OASC. We've got a large number of smart cities which are using this thing on FIWARE. We are developing common data models such that the information can be passed from one system smoothly to another one in concert with other standards bodies like TM Forum and so on and so forth. And there's more. We have the agreement with IDSA, which is in the robotics domain, for trying to get an open source implementation reference architecture here. Now, the idea here is that because we are a middle layer, you need to find the appropriate player in the vertical to try and help you define the correct interface for that particular domain. Because we're not experts in everything. We're obviously partnering with other systems as necessary. So, this is the simple overview as to what the FIWARE platform looks like. It consists of normally 5 blocks, where you can get components from the different layers which can talk to each other. The only mandatory part is you must have a context broker. The context broker receives information in NGSIV2 format, holds the current context only, and then is able to pass information on to other layers. You may well want to get your information in using a component. You can send this stuff directly, of course, if you're doing HTTP calls. And you almost certainly will want to get the information out for either processing, visualization, analysis, and so on and so forth. The other thing which goes in the core layer is that you can do things like data persistence and short-term history and what have you. But the only mandatory thing is to take the central point. As an example, on the right-hand side, we keep the security components. Obviously, you want to have a secure system, but you don't have to take our secure system. You can take an alternative security system. Similarly, we have a visualization set of visualization components. You can easily slot into that. You can just use ours. If it's not appropriate for your system, you can create a receiving endpoint which will then do your own visualization. It's not all about take the whole lot, take the bits you need. The only bit you really need is a context broker. Context broker holds the current state only of the overall smart system. This is the current set of FIWARE generic enablers. These are the 3 bits of software. The items in yellow are the incubated enablers, which are in the process of being accepted in the community. The items in white are full members who have achieved a certain level of traction within FIWARE. As you can see, we have a wide range of elements across the entire system, and I will detail some of them going forward. You can see we've got things like big data analysis, we've got things like getting connection to robots, documents exchange, getting information from Internet of Things, and so on and so forth. Looking in the core area, apart from the context broker itself, we have got several elements which are used for putting data into databases or to retrieve information on short-term history. So you can get a timeline, you can get information on trends, or you can get information posted into a large number of different databases. Again, you want this sort of thing, you just take it off the shelf, plug it in, it'll work in 5 minutes. For Comet, which is short-term history, you can get a timeline. There's an alternative for Comet called Quantum Leap, which will do it into a CrateDB rather than MongoDB database. Similarly, there is an alternative to Cygnus called Draco, which will use Apache NiFi rather than Apache Flume. As I said, even within our system, it's not take everything, you take the bits you want. If you're an expert in Flume, then obviously you'd prefer Cygnus. It's up to you. Coming in from the bottom, we need to be able to cope with proprietary systems, other IoT platforms, so on and so forth. And the way this is done is through creating a series of IoT agents. An IoT agent talks whatever language it is, whatever format it is, below the line from the south port. For example, OPC UA is an example. But on the north port, it talks pure NGSIV2. So it is a translation layer which can be configured using an API, as you'd expect. So it's a microservice. And it can also talk through various different transports. You can either talk directly using HTTP, you can use MQTT, you can use RabbitMQ, and of course, there are a wide range and growing range of IoT platforms which are supported. So this is our way of getting around the standards at the IoT level. In other words, we stay on top. We also have the ability to get data out of stream information, video information. This is the Corrento component. With Corrento, you would be able to retrieve a video stream and then hook into the images so that you can actually get some context data out. It also does a large number of other elements which are not, strictly speaking, context data related, but within our system, you'd want to get context in and out of your data. With any of these systems, you want to be able to display and then activate the system. And one of the components here is called WireCloud. WireCloud is a mashup visualization tool which reads the data from the NGSI format and then puts it out in whichever graphically pleasing method you want. This is able to you're able to add in additional custom widgets as necessary, so that, and you can share them as well, so that you can get the data in the right format, so you can make the right analysis. Another more extensive tool is Knowledge. This is a business intelligence suite, which again you're able to retrieve the NGSI data and do a wide range of queries based on what is the state of our smart system. Furthermore, we are able to connect to big data. As you would expect, you're able to extract our data and put it into some sort of system for big data analysis. You may well be in a situation where you want to be able to sell your data. Your data is valuable, and obviously you need to have sovereignty on it, and you need to be able to make money as necessary and give people access as necessary. Two components here are Extended CCAN and the business framework. Business framework will take the money for you. Extended CCAN will offer your data set as a CCAN data set, but it is actually the current context data, which is the system, so that you are able to pass information out to other systems. Now, as I said, we have a series of access control components where, as you would expect, you make a request of some sort. There is some sort of gatekeeping component. This is Wilma, which is a PEP proxy, which is a policy execution point in the jargon. And that will then talk to an IDM, which is an identity manager, saying, okay, who is this? Because they've already supplied some sort of token in their request. The IDM will give back information, including roles or including the name of the person, what have you. And then you can either ask KeyRock to adjudicate, or more likely, for a complex scenario, you can ask Auth-zForce to adjudicate, which is a policy decision point saying, based on the information I have, should I let this user through or not? It's a fairly standard architecture for securing your services. In the case where you were doing monetization, what you would need to do is you would get that system where you would have a PEP proxy in front of the accounting framework, which would say, can this user get hold of this thing? Is it going to get this be allowed through? And then once information had been passed the proxy, it would also then get the business framework to talk to CCAN. CCAN would then also request the information saying, am I really allowed to send this out? And then pass the information on. So you can see that the various components we have are able to talk amongst each other to cover the scenarios which are necessary. We have a series of developer information on our website. If there are any questions beyond the webinar today, the answer is usually look on FIWARE.org. Now, for our generic reference architecture, we take that 5-box system. Obviously, deployment is not necessary for this architecture. And again, you have the context broker layer in the middle, which is but receiving data from the data acquisition layer, and then you are processing on the top. Within this particular diagram, we're doing an agricultural system. As you can see, you get information from your machines or from your crops. It goes through the adaptation layer, so that it means that it's no longer proprietary stuff, it's NGSI. From the context broker onwards, everything is NGSI and covers our system, so you can use our access control to let people in and out in as necessary, and then we can talk to other processing layers on top. So we can also retrieve information from third parties, such as weather web services, to augment the existing context information, so that when you are receiving the information on the top layer, you've got an overall view of the context, not just or not necessarily just what's in the devices themselves. You will see that the reference architecture is very, very similar depending on which system you are looking at. So there are various examples of systems out there which are already using FIWARE or are already FIWARE ready. This is an example in the cities domain, which is a FIWARE ready solution which is able to retrieve noise information. Obviously, that would then be changed to NGSI, and it will be pushed onto the screen in a appropriate manner. Again, you've got visualization; it's the same thing. You have other examples of FIWARE, which would be, say, using industry or preventative maintenance. Once again, you have elements which are things like GPS, or you have devices in the vehicle, which would then be able to pass that as context information up to the system, and you do appropriate processing. Similarly, there are elements in the agricultural domain where you could have a collar around an animal, and that once again would give you information using the say the Sigfox IoT agent. Would then pass information up into the context data. You'd know where your animals are, you'd know how they're feeling, and you are protecting your assets. And again, another one with the idea of trying to make sure that your information in a silo is passed into the system. It's a method of analysing grain silos to see how much is left in there, and it's just purely battery powered. And there's more. There's stuff in the health domain as well. You can see that we are covering a wide range of areas. We can also use FIWARE on the basis of a system-to-system approach, because we are able to retrieve information from other context brokers as information which is relevant for my entity. So I can augment my entity with information from other systems. So we can take information from, say, a silo, a pest management system, and so on and so forth, to come up with an overall integrated version of the farm. Within smart cities, again, it's the same architecture. You've got the Orion context broker in the middle, you've got your devices at the bottom, you've got your IoT agent in the middle, and you've got your governance system at the top. Obviously, it's either at the top, where you've got the processing stuff, or right at the bottom, where you are able to supply your unique intellectual property. So that's where companies are able to make money out of this system. And farm, similar picture, and factory, similar picture. Everything is coming in the same idea. You have your devices at the bottom, you have some sort of translation layer, you get the context broker, and keep moving up the processing. So I've already mentioned the stuff about the car navigators, but the point here is that you can actually get information coming out in a fashion that other users, other third-party users, are able to retrieve. So, but we're not just about the technology. The FIWARE Foundation is about promoting this technology and covers a wider range of elements than just doing the technology itself. We don't actually create the software ourselves. We are promoting and doing it. We are trying to create a sustainable ecosystem here, which is obviously from a wide variety of users. We offer a marketplace which is usable for any system which is powered by FIWARE or FIWARE ready. Powered by FIWARE means that you've got something with a context broker. FIWARE ready means that you're able to connect to the context broker. you can see that solutions are able to go end to end, but you're also able to offer information about devices. So you can say this device will plug into any FIWARE solution. And of course, you can also offer training or consultancy services and so on and so forth. There are also the FIWARE Lab is a experimental area where you can actually upload and fiddle around with your architecture for free. And we have another area called FIWARE Mundus, which is going things worldwide. And there are a series of FIWARE iHubs where you can get technical information local to you. And we have accelerator programs. In summary, there are following 5 or 6 areas. The mission is to create this sustainable ecosystem around these royalty-free things using these 5 pillars. So that is FIWARE. In summary, context data represents the state of a physical or conceptual object which exists in the real world. You have smart solutions which are able to read information from sensors, other sources, and analyze that information to actuate the devices. This is a continuous feedback loop. FIWARE itself is an open source initiative, and we are driving the definition of a universal set of standards for context data management. If you haven't got context data in your system, it's not us, it's somebody else. Now, the name of this standard is called NGSI V2, and it is vendor neutral, so that no one company has got control of it. That is why we are a spin-off foundation, and it is usable for all interactions within the FIWARE technology. FIWARE also has a catalogue, which is a curated framework of open source platform components, which can be added to one another, and you only take the bits you want, so you get free software and the right bit of free software for you. And you only one which is essential is the context broker. You can use other components, you can use third-party components to cover that area. And the whole point here is to accelerate the development of your smart solution. You don't have to write everything from scratch, you can get 90% of it for free. Once you've created your solution, we have a marketplace which is able to promote your existing commercial offerings. And the FIWARE Foundation, which is a legally independent body, is able to protect FIWARE itself and has these 5 pillars of the FIWARE Lab, the iHubs, the Accelerator Mundus, and everything else which has been covered this morning. So that, in summary, is a brief introduction to FIWARE. And I thank you very much and hope you have a good day.